There are moments in history when silence feels louder than sound. Imagine standing among the ruins of a civilization that has been erased by time. The broken stones of temples, the weathered lines of forgotten scripts, the hollow eyes of statues that once looked out upon bustling streets. These remnants are all that remain, and yet they whisper. Not in language we understand, but in an echo that stirs something deep within us. The possibility that we are not the first to ask questions about the cosmos, nor the first to glimpse its infinite depth. What if those who came before us thousands, even tens of thousands of years ago, reached toward truths that today's science is only beginning to formulate in equations? What if myths of many worlds, realms beyond realms, were not merely poetic metaphors, but coded memories of knowledge we no longer possess? The story we are told about human history is linear. We began as hunters. We discovered agriculture. We built civilizations, and slowly, through trial and error, we forged the sciences that explain our universe. It's a story of steady progress, of ignorance yielding to reason. But beneath this official narrative runs another current one that is far less certain, far more haunting. Scattered among the ruins and oral traditions of ancient cultures are symbols, alignments and myths that hint at a deeper awareness, a vision of reality that seems astonishingly resonant with the cutting-edge debates of modern physics. Take a step back and picture the cosmos as science frames it today, a universe expanding from a singular point, perhaps endlessly inflating, birthing countless worlds beyond our reach. The multiverse, once dismissed as a fantasy, is now a serious, if controversial, conversation within cosmology. At the same time, our ancestors carved into stone tailies of layered worlds, of cycles of creation and destruction, of realms parallel to our own. To the modern eye, these are legends, spiritual allegories. But is it possible that these tailies preserved a glimpse of something more? Consider the contrast. On one side, the certainty of science, empirical, testable, bound by equations and peer review. On the other, the seduction of myth stories born in firelight, sung into memory, full of gods, spirits, and hidden dimensions. To the rational mind, they could not be further apart. And yet, like two distant shores, they seem to curve toward one another, as though destined to meet. The question is not whether ancient civilizations had particle accelerators or telescopes, but whether human consciousness itself has long been capable of intuiting truths that we are only now beginning to articulate. Stand with me in the silence of an ancient temple. Above you, the night sky spreads like a tapestry stitched with fire. The same stars that guided our ancestors gaze back upon us. They track these stars with astonishing precision, building monuments that align with solstices and equinoxes, mapping the heavens as if they believed their fate was written in cosmic patterns. Why would they devote such energy, such devotion, if the sky was merely a ceiling? Perhaps they sensed what we are beginning to prove, that the universe is not simply vast but layered, not merely expanding but branching into possibilities beyond imagination. But here lies the paradox. History, as recorded by archaeologists and scientists, gives no room for advanced civilizations before a certain threshold. There is no accepted evidence that a people long ago could have understood quantum superposition or the idea of parallel universes. Yet myths of the many worlds echo in distant cultures that never met. From the Vedic hymns of India describing countless cosmic cycles, to the Mayan vision of multiple worlds destroyed and remade, to the Norse tailies of 9 realms suspended on a cosmic tree human, imagination has persistently painted a picture of layered existence. Is this mere coincidence or the residue of a forgotten intuition? This is where the story becomes cinematic, not because it promises answers, but because it frames a question that reaches both backward into history and outward into infinity. Did lost civilizations hold fragments of multiverse knowledge, not in the language of equations, but in symbols, myths, and rituals that encoded truths about the nature of reality? And if so, why do we struggle to recognize it today? Perhaps it is because science demands evidence, while myth offers meaning. Science thrives on what can be measured, repeated, and falsified. Myth thrives on what can be felt, intuited, remembered through story. They are twin modes of understanding, the left and right hemispheres of humanity's collective mind. To dismiss myths entirely is to silence half of ourselves. To accept it blindly is to risk delusion. But to hold both in tension, that is where wonder lies. We often imagine progress as a straight line, moving ever forward from darkness to enlightenment. But what if progress is cyclical? What if knowledge is gained, lost, and rediscovered across ages? A civilization may rise, grasping at cosmic truths, only to collapse, leaving behind fragments that later generations interpret as myth. And then, centuries later, another civilization begins to climb anew, piecing together the same eternal puzzle. In this way, history itself becomes a multiverse of human memory, parallel attempts to reach the same stars, to grasp the same infinite truths. The very act of asking these questions unsettles us. It destabilizes the ground beneath the scientific method, not by disproving it, but by suggesting it may not be the only path to knowledge. It destabilizes our history, not by rewriting it, but by hinting that we may have overlooked chapters erased by time. This unease is exactly why we must linger here, in the silence between certainty and speculation, and allow ourselves to wonder. Imagine for a moment that consciousness is not confined to the brain, but is a window into the quantum fabric of reality. Imagine that ancient shamans, through altered states, glimpse the same layers of existence that physicists describe with equations. Imagine that temples aligned with stars were not just primitive observatories, but spiritual technologies designed to synchronize human minds with cosmic rhythms. In that overlap of imagination and science lies the heart of our inquiry. Could ancient civilizations have intuited multiverse truths in ways we no longer understand? Skeptics will rightly object. Myths are not equations, rituals are not experiments, and intuition is not proof. And yet, as science itself teaches us, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The sands of time bury more than bones and stones. They bury ideas, languages, entire frameworks of thought. If a civilization's deepest insights were preserved in metaphors rather than mathematics, then perhaps we have misread their whispers, mistaking depth for superstition. This is why the ruins of Earth matter. They are not simply stones and dust. They are keys to our own forgotten memory. They remind us that what seems impossible to one age may be self-evident to another. They stand as both evidence and absence, presence and silence, proof and mystery dot as we step deeper into this journey. We will not claim certainty where none exists. Instead, we will explore the tension between what science reveals and what myth suggests, between what the evidence shows and what the imagination dares to envision. This is not a quest for answers, but for questions that expand the boundaries of thought. So, as the screen fades from the silence of ancient ruins to the silence of deep space, let us ask again, are we truly the first to imagine the multiverse? Or are we walking paths once traveled by civilizations whose whispers still echo in the stones, waiting for us to listen? Because the greatest mysteries are not only written in equations or carved in ruins, they are written in us. And it is here, at the intersection of memory and imagination, science and myth, that we begin our journey. The universe, as we know it, has always been a stage for human imagination. For centuries, the night sky was a dome of mystery, its stars burning like eternal candles. To the ancients, it was a canvas of gods and spirits. To modern science, it is a laboratory of galaxies, particles, and forces. Yet somewhere in the vast gap between myth and mathematics lies one of the most daring ideas of all, the multiverse. The multiverse is not a single theory, but a collection of hypotheses, each suggesting that what we call the universe may be only a fragment of something infinitely larger. The idea unsettles us because it fractures the very foundation of our worldview. If there are multiple universes, then our own existence is neither unique nor central. It is just one expression among countless others. And this realization forces us to question everything: the nature of reality, the meaning of consciousness, and the fragile notion that our cosmos is a solitary stage thought to trace the modern roots of this concept. We must step back to the mid-20th century, when a young physicist named Hugh Everett challenged one of the most puzzling aspects of quantum mechanics. Quantum physics tells us that particles exist in states of superposition, being in multiple positions or conditions simultaneously until observed. It is the classic paradox of Schrödinger's cat. A cat locked in a box is both alive and dead until the lid is lifted. The Copenhagen interpretation, favored by many physicists of Everett's time, argued that the act of observation collapses this cloud of possibilities into a single reality. But Everett saw another way. What if, he asked, the cat is not alive or dead, but alive and dead, just not in the same universe? What if every quantum event branches into multiple realities, each carrying forward its own version of the outcome? Everett's many worlds interpretation proposed that the universe constantly splits, creating parallel realities for every possible decision, every particle's flicker, every quantum roll of the dice. The implication was staggering. Not only might there be other universes, but there might be infinite versions of ourselves, living out different choices. At the time, Everett's ideas were met with skepticism, even ridicule. The notion seemed more like science fiction than serious physics. Yet over decades, as quantum mechanics continued to baffle and resist intuitive explanation, many worlds gained a foothold. Today, it stands as one of the most intriguing, if unsettling, interpretations of quantum reality. But Everett's vision has only one pathway into the multiverse. Another emerged from cosmology, the study of the universe's origins. In the 1980s, Andre Linde developed the theory of eternal inflation. According to the Big Bang model, the universe began in an unimaginable explosion of energy and has been expanding ever since. Inflation theory refines this picture, suggesting that in the first fraction of a second, the universe expanded at a speed faster than light. But Linde went further. He proposed that inflation may not have been a one-time event. Instead, pockets of space might continue to inflate, bubbling off into new universes. Each bubble would be isolated, with its own physical laws, constants, and dimensions. In this cosmic foam, our universe is just one bubble in an endless sea. This inflationary multiverse paints a picture even more radical than Everett's. Not only would there be multiple universes, but some of them could be so different that they defy comprehension. Imagine a universe where gravity is weaker, where atoms cannot form, where stars never ignite. Imagine another where time flows in loops rather than lines, or where consciousness is built into the very structure of physics. Within Linde's vision, all possibilities exist because infinity allows for everything. Yet still another vision arrives from string theory, the ambitious attempt to unify all forces and particles into a single framework. String theory suggests that the fundamental building blocks of reality are not particles, but tiny vibrating strings of energy. These strings require extra dimensions, far more than the familiar 3 of space and 1 of time. Some versions predict up to 11 dimensions. From these hidden dimensions emerge countless possible configurations of physics, each corresponding to a different universe. This string landscape suggests an almost incomprehensible number of potential realities, 10,500 or more, each with its own rules of existence. Together, These three approaches, Everett's quantum many-worlds, Lind's inflationary bubbles, and string theory's landscape, form the foundations of modern multiverse thinking. They differ in mechanism, but they share a common theme. Reality is larger, stranger, and more layered than our senses reveal. And yet, for every physicist who entertains these ideas, another raises sharp objections. The central criticism is testability. Science, by definition, demands evidence. Theories must be falsifiable, meaning they can be tested and potentially proven wrong. But if other universes are truly separate from ours, forever beyond our instruments, then how can we ever confirm their existence? Some argue that the multiverse lies outside the boundaries of science, drifting into the territory of metaphysics. This criticism strikes at the heart of the debate. Is the multiverse a bold extension of science or a beautiful illusion? A castle built on mathematics and imagination? For some, the inability to test the multiverse makes it meaningless as a scientific claim. For others, the very fact that multiple theories from independent directions converge on similar ideas is itself suggestive. If not proof. Max Tegmark, a physicist known for his classifications of multiverse levels, has become one of the most visible voices in this conversation. He categorizes possible multiverses into 4 levels. The first is the simplest: regions beyond our observable universe, forever hidden because light from them has not had time to reach us. The second corresponds to the inflationary bubbles. The third aligns with Everett's many worlds branching. And the fourth is the most radical: the idea that all mathematical structures exist as physical realities. In Tegmark's ultimate vision, mathematics itself generates universes, every possible equation, every possible structure, realized somewhere in the infinite. Tegmark's proposal blurs the line between physics and philosophy. It asks us to consider whether reality is not only described by mathematics, but literally is mathematics. If so, then the multiverse is not speculation but necessity, an infinite expression of all that mathematics allows. Still, Tegmark's boldness invites criticism. Some argue his level 4 multiverse is not science but metaphysics, untestable by any conceivable experiment. Others warn that chasing untestable ideas risks turning physics into theology. Yet Tegmark counters with a philosophical challenge. If mathematics has proven to be the most reliable language of the universe, why should we believe its scope ends with our own reality? Here lies the contrast that fuels both fascination and doubt. On one side, the multiverse seems like an inevitable extension of theories already accepted in physics. On the other, it threatens to dissolve science into speculation. Some call it the ultimate scientific insight. Others, the ultimate surrender to imagination. And so, we find ourselves caught between awe and skepticism. The multiverse offers an escape from cosmic loneliness. We are not alone. Our universe is not unique. It offers explanations for mysteries, like the fine-tuning of physical constants, which seem improbably suited for life. In a multiverse, we exist not because the universe is special, but because in infinite universes, some will inevitably allow life. Yet at the same time, this reasoning feels slippery, an answer that cannot be proven, only supposed. This is the intellectual tension that defines the multiverse debate. It mirrors the same contrasts that animate ancient myths: certainty versus mystery, evidence versus meaning, knowledge versus imagination. The multiverse forces us to walk the razor's edge between what can be known and what must remain. Wonder. But here is where the story bends back toward the ancient. For while physicists construct these models with equations, our ancestors imagined layered worlds through story. Myths of cosmic trees, stacked heavens, and cyclical universes may not have been literal science, but they resonate with uncanny echoes of modern speculation. The question we must ask is whether these parallels are coincidence, or whether they hint at a deeper continuity of human intuition, stretching from the dawn of civilization to the laboratories of today. This is why laying the foundations matters. Before we can ask whether lost civilizations might have touched on multiverse knowledge, we must first understand what the multiverse is within science itself, its theories, its promise, its controversies. Only then can we draw the lines of contrast, myth against mathematics, story against science, whispers of the past against visions of the present. And so, as we step forward, we carry this paradox with us. The multiverse is both the height of scientific ambition and the edge of scientific humility. It could be the key to understanding why there is something rather than nothing, or it could be a mirror, reflecting back the limits of our imagination. Either way, it is a stage upon which the mysteries of ancient civilizations will soon find their echoes. Because in the end, whether the multiverse is real or speculative, testable or unreachable, it asks us the same question that has haunted humanity from the beginning. What lies beyond the horizon of our knowledge? And in that question, science and myth, past and present, may not be as far apart as they seem. When we look back at the earliest civilizations, we often see farmers, builders, and warriors. But behind the plows and the stones, there was something else, an obsession with the cosmos. Again and again, across continents and cultures, we find humanity gazing upward, asking not only where the stars are, but what they mean. And from these questions emerge systems of knowledge that are far more intricate than we usually imagine, woven not only from myth, but from mathematics, astronomy, and a kind of intuition that feels eerily resonant with today's most daring scientific ideas. Consider the Mesopotamians, the architects of some of humanity's first great cities. They watched the skies with painstaking care, charting the motions of planets and predicting eclipses. To them, the heavens were not random. They were a clock, a living calendar written across the night. Their gods moved in cycles, just as the stars did. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving texts, does not describe multiple universes in the language of physics, but it does speak of realms beyond the human, layered worlds of gods, heroes, and spirits, each influencing the other. Were these merely metaphors for the forces of nature, or an early attempt to express the intuition that reality itself is structured in levels? Shift to the Indian subcontinent, where the Vedic tradition unfolded thousands of years ago. Here, we find a vision of the cosmos not as a single linear creation, but as an eternal cycle of births and destructions. The Rig Veda describes universes that emerge, dissolve, and re-emerge endlessly. Later Hindu philosophy developed the idea of countless lokas worlds stacked upon worlds, some higher, some lower, each with its own rules and beings. When modern cosmologists speak of bubble universes budding from eternal inflation, one cannot help but hear an echo of these ancient hymns. Coincidence? Or evidence that the human mind, when it stretches into the infinite, finds similar patterns across time? The Egyptians offer another layer of mystery. To them, the afterlife was not a distant heaven, but a vast realm parallel to our own, navigable by the soul after death. The Book of the Dead is not simply funerary poetry. It is a map, a guide for traveling through dimensions unseen. The pyramids themselves, aligned so precisely with Orion's belt, suggest that the Egyptians were not only builders, but cosmic thinkers. They constructed monuments that anchored the human world to the stars, as if to remind future generations that the earth and the cosmos are mirrors of each other. In their vision, the boundary between the physical and the metaphysical was not absolute. Could it be that, in their own symbolic language, they gestured toward dimensions beyond our perception? Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, the Maya developed calendars so advanced that they could predict solar and lunar eclipses with astonishing accuracy. For them, Time itself was not a straight line but a series of interlocking cycles. Their myths spoke of multiple creations, each world destroyed and remade. The Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Maya, describes failed universes, worlds of mud and wood that collapsed before the present one was finally stabilized. When physicists today discuss the possibility of failed universes in the inflationary, multiverse cosmic bubbles where physics does not allow stars or life, it is difficult not to notice the resonance, even in indigenous traditions, far from the centers of written civilization. We find similar themes. The Norse spoke of Yggdrasil, the great cosmic tree that holds 9 realms, worlds stacked and interwoven, connected by roots and branches. Many Native American cosmologies describe layers of existence, with humanity traveling upward or downward through worlds. Again and again, humanity imagines not one reality, but many, interwoven, parallel, cyclic, or stacked. Here lies the haunting question. How do we explain these parallels? The mainstream view holds that myths are psychological projections of human imagination shaped by survival, environment, and culture. And this explanation carries weight. After all, it is natural for early humans to perceive cycles in nature, day and night, seasons, birth and death. From these rhythms, it is not a great leap to imagine cosmic cycles. In this sense, the myths may simply reflect observation filtered through imagination, but the counterpoint is just as compelling. If these myths were purely cultural inventions, why do they converge on certain recurring motifs across continents and millennia? Why do civilizations separated by oceans, with no known contact, envision layered worlds, cyclical universes, and hidden realms beyond the physical? Could it be that these ideas are not arbitrary, but spring from a deeper intuition and innate resonance with the very structure of reality? This is where contrast sharpens. Modern physics frames these possibilities in equations, multiverse models, inflationary fields, quantum superpositions. Ancient civilizations framed them in symbols, cosmic trees, cycles of creation, divine realms. At first glance, the difference seems absolute numbers versus myths, telescopes versus temples. But peel back the surface, and both are reaching for the same horizon, an understanding of reality that exceeds the visible. Skeptics will insist that drawing parallels between ancient myth and modern physics is misleading, even dangerous. To conflate symbolic stories with empirical theories risks collapsing science into superstition. And they are right to caution us. We must not mistake poetic metaphor for experimental truth. Yet, to dismiss these ancient systems entirely is to overlook a crucial point. They reveal the depth of human intuition. They remind us that long before particle accelerators, long before equations, the human mind was already stretching toward infinity, already sensing that reality is layered, cyclical, and mysterious. This is the seed of cosmic thought. Civilizations may rise and fall. Technologies may be lost, but the human impulse to ask, to wonder, to imagine beyond the visible, that is eternal. Whether through myth or mathematics, humanity seeks to articulate the same questions. Where did we come from? What lies beyond? Are we alone? Is our universe unique or part of something greater? And perhaps that is the key. Ancient civilizations did not possess modern physics, but they possessed something equally powerful, a worldview unafraid of mystery. They did not separate myth from science, story from fact. To them, reality was a tapestry woven of both. Today, we often divide science on one side, religion and myth on the other. But in that ancient unity, there may be lessons. If myth can preserve fragments of intuition, and science can test the structures of reality, then perhaps the two together point us toward truths that neither could fully hold alone. Imagine, then, that the seeds planted by these civilizations were not lost but waiting. waiting for a time when equations could join with myths, when telescopes could align with symbols, when we might see that the human journey through knowledge is not linear but recursive, an eternal cycle of remembering and rediscovering. This is why we cannot dismiss the whispers of Mesopotamia, the chants of the Vedas, the alignments of Egypt, the calendars of the Maya. They are not simply relics of superstition, but echoes of a human intuition that reality is more than it seems. They remind us that our ancestors were not blind in their wonder. They may have lacked our tools, but not our longing. They may not have spoken of quantum superposition or inflationary bubbles, but they spoke of layered worlds, cycles of creation, and cosmic trees, and in doing so, they reached toward the same infinite mystery. And so we must ask, are these parallels coincidences, or fragments of a forgotten cosmic intuition? Could it be that humanity has always sensed the multiverse, glimpsed it in dream, ritual, and story, even before we sought to prove it in laboratories? If so, then the myths of the past are not merely stories, but seeds that, when placed beside modern physics, may blossom into a vision of reality far greater than either alone dot as we move forward. From myths and cycles into ruins and monuments, the question grows sharper. Did lost civilizations preserve more than symbols? Did they encode knowledge in stone, alignment, and ritual knowledge that could suggest not only awareness of the cosmos, but a deeper, forgotten relationship with it? This is where the whispers of myth meet the silence of ruins, where the seeds of cosmic thought may bear fruit. There are moments in human history where the soil itself seems to whisper secrets, where stone pillars and submerged ruins rise up to challenge everything we thought we knew about our past. These are not just broken fragments of forgotten villages. They are enigmas, puzzles frozen in stone, that dare us to look beyond survival and into the possibility of hidden legacies. Could it be that lost civilizations held knowledge far richer than we imagine knowledge, that may echo with the same cosmic questions driving today's science? At the heart of this mystery stands Göbekli Tepe, a site that has forced archaeology to redraw its timelines. Carved into the hills of southeastern Turkey, its T-shaped pillars, adorned with animals and abstract symbols, date back more than 11,000 years millennia before the first cities were thought to have risen. For decades, human progress was described as linear, hunting and gathering first, agriculture later, then temples and cities much after. Yet Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite. Here was monumental architecture built long before farms, implying that myth and ritual, not just necessity, may have been the seedbed of civilization. Even more intriguing are the alignments. Some researchers argue the pillars echo star constellations, perhaps mapping the sky as it looked in ancient millennia. Could early humans have been not only surviving, but deliberately engaging with the cosmos? The mainstream archaeological view is more cautious. The site was a communal gathering ground, its carvings symbolic rather than scientific. Yet the tension between these interpretations is exactly what fuels wonder. Were these stones simply ritualistic canvases, or the first observatories of a people seeking to decode the universe? Göbekli Tepe is not alone in this ambiguity. The myth of Atlantis, recorded by Plato, has for centuries cast its shadow over human imagination. Described as a great civilization lost beneath the waves, it is often dismissed as allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris. But to some, Atlantis feels too precise, too evocative, to be mere invention. Submerged ruins off the coast of India, megalithic structures buried in the sands of Egypt, and underwater stone formations near Japan all stir whispers. What if there really were advanced societies, swept away by cataclysms, leaving behind nothing but myths clothed as memory? Critics warn us not to romanticize. Human cultures have always told flood myths, and geology shows us that rising seas after the Ice Age could have drowned countless coastal settlements. Atlantis, then, may be no more than a poetic memory of real but ordinary disasters. And yet, the mystery endures because the fragments we do find, though strange, out of place, ruins keep feeding the possibility of a greater story. Take the unexplained megaliths scattered across the globe. The great blocks of Baalbek in Lebanon, some weighing over 1,000 tons, dwarf the ambitions of later empires. How were they cut, moved, and raised with Bronze Age technology? Orthodox explanations point to ropes, sledges, and ingenuity magnified by generations of labor. Yet speculation persists. What if these structures encode forgotten engineering principles, or worse, remnants of knowledge now lost? Consider also the pyramids of Egypt. Egyptologists describe them as tombs built through labor, mathematics, and organization. But for others, the pyramids are not merely tombs. They are celestial machines, aligned to Orion's belt, calibrated with the cardinal points, embodying a harmony between earth and sky. Was this cosmic design intentional or coincidental? Science insists on caution. Myth whispers otherwise. In the jungles of Central America, Mayan and Aztec monuments tell a similar story. Their step pyramids mark solstices, eclipses, and planetary cycles with astonishing accuracy. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan texts, contains calculations of Venus's orbit more precise than those of some early European astronomers. Were these cultures simply attentive sky watchers, or did they inherit fragments of knowledge from sources now erased? The paradox is striking. On one hand, archaeology presents us with clear, practical explanations. Human beings are inventive, adaptive, capable of extraordinary feats, even without modern tools. On the other, the scale, precision, and symbolism of these monuments suggest that survival was never their only goal. They were not just farmers and hunters. They were dreamers, philosophers, seekers of cosmic order. And in that ambition, they echo us. Skeptics often argue that to invoke lost civilizations is to undermine human creativity, to assume that ancient people could not achieve greatness without hidden technologies. Believers counter that dismissing the mysteries risks ignoring evidence of deeper legacies. The debate is less about facts than about interpretation, less about stones than about meaning. Even the act of erasure raises questions. Why was Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried? Was it ritual closure or an attempt to hide knowledge? Why do so many ancient texts, Mayan codices, Alexandrian scrolls survive only in fragments? Is this coincidence or the shadow of lost narratives? Sometimes absence itself becomes evidence, an emptiness that invites speculation. The attraction of these mysteries lies not in proving advanced civilizations, but in what they reveal about human imagination. We are drawn to the idea that beneath the official record lies a deeper story, one that connects ritual to cosmos, myth to mathematics. Even if Atlantis is allegory, even if Göbekli Tepe is ritualistic, the fact remains. Our ancestors reached beyond necessity. They encoded their relationship to the universe into stone, into myth, into story. Science thrives on skepticism, and rightly so. But speculation thrives on wonder, and sometimes wonder pushes us toward truths not yet visible. Could it be that these ruins are not evidence of forgotten science, but reminders of a recurring impulse, the human need to ask cosmic questions? That impulse itself may be the hidden legacy of lost civilizations, the drive to see the universe not as backdrop, but as mystery calling us forward. We stand today with equations that speak of multiple universes, with telescopes probing galaxies billions of light years away, with quantum theories that defy common sense. Yet in the shadow of those ancient stones, we sense continuity. The same hunger that carved myths of Atlantis, aligned pyramids to the stars, and buried cosmic stories in stone is alive in us still. The ruins are mirrors reflecting not just what was lost, but what endures. our quest to locate ourselves in a cosmos vast and unknowable. And so, we arrive at a threshold. If Göbekli Tepe, Atlantis, Baalbek, and the pyramids are fragments of a forgotten story, then perhaps the next step is to see how myth and symbols themselves act as vessels for cosmic truth. Beyond ruins and legacies lies the deeper terrain, the realm where human imagination, myth, and quantum mystery collide. There is a frontier more mysterious than the stars, more elusive than black holes, and more uncharted than the distant galaxies we aim our telescopes toward. That frontier lies within us, the human mind. It is here, in the flickering currents of thought, memory, and awareness, that some of the most profound mysteries of the universe take shape. For all our equations about particles and fields, the fact remains, without consciousness, there would be no universe to contemplate. But what is consciousness? For centuries, philosophers and scientists have wrestled with this question. Is the mind merely the byproduct of brain matter, an emergent property of neurons firing in complex patterns? Or is consciousness something deeper, woven into the very fabric of reality itself? And if the latter is true, could it be that our minds are more than passive observers? They may be active participants in shaping the universe. In the late 20th century, two unlikely collaborators, mathematician Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, proposed a theory that dared to bridge physics with consciousness. Their idea, known as orchestrated objective reduction, or ORCR, suggested that consciousness arises not from classical computations in the brain, but from quantum processes within microscopic structures called microtubules. These protein scaffolds, deep inside neurons, might function like tiny quantum computers, capable of sustaining delicate superpositions that collapse into conscious experience. To some, this proposal sounded like science fiction, or worse, pseudoscience. How could fragile quantum states survive in the warm, wet, noisy environment of the brain? Yet Penrose argued that human consciousness displays qualities that go beyond algorithmic computation. He believed that insight, creativity, and the very feeling of subjective awareness could not be explained by classical physics alone. If the universe itself obeys quantum rules, why should the brain be excluded? Hameroff, drawing from his medical background, pointed to the peculiar effects of anesthesia. A few milligrams of chemicals can silence consciousness completely, switching off awareness while leaving basic brain functions intact. Could it be, he wondered, that anesthetics work not merely on neurons, but on quantum processes within them? If so, consciousness itself might be the delicate dance of quantum states collapsing into awareness moment by moment. Not all scientists agreed. Many neuroscientists argue that consciousness emerges entirely from electrochemical processes, and that ORCO is untestable, even fanciful. They point to advances in brain imaging, mapping correlations between neural activity and subjective experience. In this view, the mind is nothing more than the sum of its parts, a biological machine producing the illusion of self. Yet even here, a mystery remains unsolved. How does matter produce experience? How does the physical give rise to the subjective, the taste of sweetness, the ache of longing, the awareness of I am? This is the hard problem of consciousness, and it refuses to be dismissed. Parallel to ORCO-R lies another profound idea: physicist John Wheeler's participatory universe. Wheeler suggested that reality itself may be incomplete without observers. In his words, we live not in a universe of cold indifference, but in a participatory cosmos, where observation plays a role in bringing the universe into being. If quantum events remain probabilistic until measured, then perhaps consciousness is not merely inside us, it is written into the architecture of existence. This concept blurs the line between physics and philosophy, raising questions that echo ancient wisdom traditions. For millennia, Mystics, shamans, and seekers across cultures have claimed that consciousness is not confined to the brain. The Upanishads of India describe the self as Atman, an eternal awareness identical to Brahman, the cosmic ground of reality. Buddhist traditions speak of consciousness as fundamental, a vast field into which the self dissolves through meditation. Indigenous cosmologies describe dreams and visions as portals into parallel worlds. Were these traditions metaphorical poetry or intuitive glimpses of truth? Science is only now beginning to circle. Consider meditation. Modern neuroscience has shown that deep meditative states alter brain activity, shifting patterns away from the chatter of the default mode network towards synchronized rhythms that resemble coherence. Practitioners report sensations of timelessness, unity, or access to realms beyond ordinary perception. Could such states, in some way, mimic the branching of quantum probabilities, allowing the mind to experience realities normally inaccessible? Ritual and altered states offer another path. From the ayahuasca ceremonies of the Amazon to the Soma rituals of Vedic India, humans have long sought substances or practices that shift consciousness into extraordinary modes. Participants often describe visions of parallel realities, beings of light, or insights into the fabric of existence. To the materialist neuroscientist, these are hallucinations generated by chemical alterations in the brain. But to others, they are windows into hidden dimensions of consciousness, perhaps even a kind of experiential multiverse. It is here that we encounter the paradox. Ancient texts and myths, from India's Upanishads to the Mayan Popol Vuh, speak of layered realities, divine architectures, and cosmic orders. Plato wrote of Atlantis as a civilization swallowed by the sea. Mesopotamian tablets describe beings who descended from the heavens with knowledge of the stars. And yet, when we turn to the soil, to the stone, to the laboratory, we find no machines, no devices, no smoking gun of lost science. Why? Skeptics argue the answer is simple: because such things never existed. Myths are metaphors, not history. Civilizations of the deep past were ingenious, but bound by the same limits of stone and wood that archaeology reveals. To assume otherwise, they say, is to fall prey to fantasy. And yet, the absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Imagine the tools we use today: books, computers, satellites. How many of them would survive 1,000 years, let alone 10,000? A silicon chip disintegrates quickly. Paper turns to dust. Plastics degrade, metals rust, and entire cities can vanish beneath jungle or desert sands in mere centuries. What would remain of our world if a catastrophe swept it away? A few skyscraper foundations, perhaps. A scattering of glass. And myths whispered by survivors. So when we look for evidence of lost knowledge, we must remember the impermanence of matter. The ancients may have worked with materials that left no trace. They may have encoded knowledge in oral traditions, ritual practices, or symbols, rather than in machines. They may have been erased by conquest, by flood, by the deliberate suppression of memory. History itself is a battlefield of erasure. Libraries burn. Temples are smashed. Languages vanish. How much knowledge has been lost, not because it never existed, but because it was actively destroyed. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous symbol, but it was not alone. Countless scrolls, tablets, and oral teachings have been extinguished, leaving behind only faint echoes in myth. This is the paradox. The farther back we look, the more we must rely on traces that were never meant to last. Consider the ancient Indian texts. The Vedas, the Upanishads, and later the Mahabharata and Ramayana describe realities that sound, at times, like modern cosmology. They speak of multiple worlds, of cycles of creation and destruction, of subtle energies that bind the cosmos. Were these poetic metaphors? Spiritual allegories? or cultural memories of insights into layered realities. Mainstream scholars lean toward allegory, pointing out that mythic language does not require literal interpretation. Yet some argue that metaphors themselves may preserve kernels of forgotten truth, ideas too complex to express in practical language, encoded instead in story and ritual. The Mayans, too, described multiple layers of existence, worlds stacked upon worlds, connected by a cosmic tree. The Egyptians spoke of the Duat, the hidden realm parallel to ours. Indigenous Australians tell of the Dreamtime, a reality woven through the physical world but unseen by ordinary eyes. Are these independent cultural metaphors or scattered memories of a deeper shared perception of reality? Archaeology, however, rarely confirms these myths. Göbekli Tepe reveals astonishing symbolic sophistication, but no clear evidence of technology as we define it. The pyramids inspire wonder, but the consensus is that they were built with extraordinary labor and ingenuity, not machines or lost sciences. Stonehenge aligns with the heavens, but its builders left no treatise on multiverse theory. For the scientific mind, this silence is decisive. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And yet, silence is not the same as proof of absence. We must also confront the role of power in shaping memory. Empires rise and rewrite history in their own image. Victors dictate what is remembered and what is buried. The Spanish conquest of the Americas destroyed countless codices, erasing millennia of Mayan and Aztec knowledge. Only a handful survived, and they are enough to hint at astronomical sophistication that still astonishes scholars. How much more might have been lost? Likewise, colonization, war, and religious zeal have obliterated entire systems of knowledge. What remains are fragments, distorted through the lens of later interpreters. When myths speak of gods from the sky, are we hearing echoes of astronomy or projections of colonial-era translations? The paradox deepens. The more a culture knows, the more it may have been targeted for erasure. So we stand between two poles. On one side, mainstream archaeology, grounded in tangible evidence, warns against leaping from myth to machine, from metaphor to multiverse. On the other hand, speculative interpretation asks whether the silences themselves tell a story, that what we do not find may be as meaningful as what we do. Take the case of Atlantis. Most historians agree that Plato's tale was allegory, a philosophical parable about hubris and decline. And yet, for centuries, seekers have combed the seas, convinced that some fragment of truth hides beneath the waves. Is it fantasy? Or a distorted cultural memory of a lost coastal civilization swallowed by rising seas at the end of the last ice age? Absence leaves room for both dismissal and wonder. There is another angle often overlooked. Knowledge itself need not be technological to be advanced. We equate progress with machines, but what if earlier civilizations developed systems of consciousness, ritual, or symbolic mapping that conveyed insights into reality without leaving behind gears or engines? A chant, a pattern of stones, an initiation rite. These leave almost nothing for archaeology to recover. Yet they may have encoded entire OOGIES.NISSENSE. The paradox is sharpened. The absence of evidence is not merely due to loss. It may be due to the nature of the knowledge itself. Some forms of wisdom are not meant to be preserved in objects, but in living traditions. When the tradition dies, the evidence vanishes. Myths then become our double-edged tools. They are the only surviving testimony of forgotten ways of seeing, but they are also notoriously pliable, reshaped over generations. The archaeologist demands bones and stones. The mythographer listens to stories. Between them lies a chasm of uncertainty. And yet, that chasm is fertile ground. For it is here that human imagination and human curiosity thrive. The absence of evidence compels us to ask deeper questions, not only about the past, but about the limits of our methods. Science is self-correcting. New discoveries can overturn old assumptions overnight. A few decades ago, Göbekli Tepe was unthinkable, a monumental site built thousands of years before agriculture. What else waits beneath the sands, the jungles, the oceans? Only a fraction of Earth's surface has been thoroughly excavated. Entire chapters of human history may yet lie hidden. Thus, the paradox is not a dead end, but a horizon. Absence challenges us, humbles us, and reminds us that the story of humanity, and perhaps the story of consciousness itself, is incomplete. And so we circle back to the question: when myths speak of layered realities, should we dismiss them as dreams or hear them as faint echoes of forgotten knowledge? Archaeology offers silence, but silence is not certain. What is lost may still linger, not in objects, but in patterns, symbols, and the collective memory of humanity. The paradox is not that evidence is missing. It is that the absence itself may be the greatest clue of all. For it invites us to consider that human history is deeper, stranger, and more fragile than we imagine. And as we step forward into the next mystery, into physics, consciousness, and the cosmos, we must carry this lesson with us: that what is unseen may shape the visible, that what is forgotten may echo in the present, and that absence itself is a kind of presence, urging us to keep searching. The debate begins with silence, the kind of silence that follows a question too large to answer. Are the myths of lost civilizations and multiverse-like realities nothing more than coincidence? Or do they echo a memory etched deep into the human story? On one side, the scientists stand firm, holding the banner of evidence, insisting that theories must be testable, falsifiable, and repeatable. For them, the multiverse is already on the razor's edge of legitimacy, mathematically intriguing, yes, but unanchored to experiment. To extend it further into the realm of ancient myth, they argue, is to abandon reason altogether. And yet, across the divide, there are those who whisper that the echoes are too consistent, the patterns too persistent for chance alone to explain. From the temples of Egypt to the stone circles of Europe, from Mayan glyphs to Vedic hymns, humanity's oldest stories return again and again to layered realities, to cycles of creation, to a cosmos far larger than what we see. The tension between these worldviews is not merely intellectual, it is emotional. Science offers the cool clarity of logic, the safety of measurable truth. Myth offers warmth, meaning, and a sense of belonging to something eternal. For every physicist that the multiverse is an elegant fiction, there is a seeker who finds in myth the traces of forgotten wisdom. The two languages often pass each other like ships in the night, each suspicious of the other. Archaeologists point to the absence of machines, writings, or concrete evidence to support claims of advanced civilizations. To them, pyramids and megaliths are triumphs of human persistence, not proof of lost science. Yet those who listen to the myths argue that the very consistency of cosmic motifs, worlds upon worlds, cycles upon cycles, is itself a form of evidence, not of technology, but of human memory, carried across millennia. In this debate, coincidence becomes the battleground. Are the alignments of ancient monuments with solstices and stars the product of necessity, ritual, and symbolism? Or were they windows into a greater cosmic order that we are only now rediscovering with telescopes and equations? The skeptic says it is chance, the product of human fascination with the sky. The believer says it is memory, a knowledge once held in ways we no longer understand. When a Mayan calendar maps cycles of time that resemble cosmic rhythms, is it coincidence or the survival of a cosmic intuition lost to modern minds? When Vedic texts describe countless worlds, is it poetic imagination or a fragment of the same reality that Everett's many worlds interpretation now proposes? The irony is that both sides share the same yearning, Scientists push equations to their limits, chasing glimpses of realities beyond our own. Dreamers and seekers turn to ancient stories, sensing that our ancestors walk closer to truths we have forgotten. Both stare into the abyss, one armed with mathematics, the other with myth. And somewhere in between, the human imagination strains to bridge the gap. Could it be that myths are not evidence in themselves, but the residue of a deeper human perception, an ability to sense the vastness of reality, not through instruments, but through intuition, ritual, and altered states of consciousness? But science does not bend easily. For the empiricist, myth is not data, and coincidence is not proof. Without testable predictions, without evidence that can be unearthed, weighed, and measured, the multiverse remains a theory, and lost civilizations remain fantasy. And yet the stubbornness of silence raises its own questions. If so many myths across time and geography speak of layered realities, why do they converge on such similar themes? If monuments align with the stars, why do they echo patterns that resonate with cosmic cycles modern astronomy confirms? Dismissal may feel safe, but it leaves a hollow unease. What if the warmth of myth hides a truth that cold empiricism has not yet learned to measure? The great debate is less about facts than about worldviews. One side fears the chaos of ungrounded speculation. The other fears the sterility of refusing to wonder. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one over the other, but in recognizing that human understanding has always required both the precision of reason and the fastidious expansiveness of imagination. For in the end, coincidence and cosmic memory may be two faces of the same mystery, waiting for us to see beyond the divide we have drawn. And as the debate lingers, unresolved and alive, it prepares the ground for the next step, to ask not only whether memory is real, but whether consciousness itself is the bridge between myth and science, the place where the human mind reaches out toward the multiverse and dares to call it. The debate sharpens the further we probe, because it is not just about history or physics, it is about what it means to be human standing in the shadow of the unknown. The archaeologist holds fragments of pottery in one hand, the skeptic's voice echoing, "This is what remains. Build from here." The seeker, meanwhile, gazes skyward, seeing in the constellations the same maps our ancestors carved into stone, and whispers, "This cannot be coincidence." Between them lies the chasm of interpretation, a gulf where evidence is scarce and meaning is contested. And it is in this gulf that the human mind wrestles with the possibility that memory may be encoded not in artifacts, but in story, in ritual, in consciousness itself. When countless cultures describe layered realities or cycles of rebirth, are we to believe that imagination alone produced such symmetry across time and space? Or does this symmetry point to something shared, something remembered not in the bones of civilizations, but in the very bones of our species? Consider how myths of great floods ripple across the globe. From Mesopotamia to India, from Mesoamerica to the Pacific Islands, stories of a deluge destroying an earlier world echo like thunder across cultures. Science, with its tools, can confirm ancient floods and rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. But science cannot fully explain why humans, scattered across continents, told the same story in their own tongues. Is it coincidence, a natural fear of water magnified into myth? Or is it a cultural memory of real cataclysms encoded in symbols to survive the erosion of centuries? Here, again, the skeptic sees allegory, while the believer sees evidence of a shared past. Both positions carry weight, yet neither silences the unease that we may be dismissing fragments of a larger truth. The debate deepens when we look to alignments carved into the earth. At Stonehenge, at Chichen Itza, at Nabta Playa, massive stones mark solstices and equinoxes, tracking the heavens with precision. Archaeologists explain them as agricultural calendars, practical tools to predict planting and harvest. And indeed, survival demanded such knowledge. But seekers ask, why the obsession with the stars? Why the monumental effort to build cosmic clocks out of stone? Could it be that our ancestors sought more than crops, that they sought to harmonize themselves with a cosmic order, one that modern science is only now beginning to glimpse through equations and telescopes? Again, the archaeologist says necessity, while the seeker says memory. The question lingers, heavy with wonder. Are we witnessing mere coincidence, or are we brushing against the residues of cosmic knowledge, half forgotten yet carved into the earth itself? This tension becomes almost unbearable when myth appears to anticipate concepts we now cloak in physics. The Upanishads speak of countless universes, the Mayans of cycles within cycles, the Norse of 9 worlds connected by Yggdrasil. These are not literal equations, yet they mirror structures modern physics proposes in the multiverse, in quantum branching, and cosmic inflation. The skeptic insists that myth is metaphor, and that drawing parallels is romantic projection. But the seeker counters that myth has always been humanity's symbolic language, encoding perceptions that could not be expressed mathematically. Might it be that the ancients glimpsed realities we now approach with physics, though they expressed them in song, in story, in stone? The possibility unsettles the rational mind, but it stirs something deeper, an intuition that humanity has always carried echoes of truths larger than itself. The great debate is therefore not simply about evidence. It is about thresholds. What do we accept as valid knowledge? The scientist says, only what can be measured. The seeker says, meaning itself is a form of knowledge, and patterns across myth are too consistent to dismiss. Each side fears something in the other. The scientist fears being lost in fantasy, untethered from the rigor that has built our understanding of the cosmos. The seeker fears being trapped in reductionism, stripped of wonder and blind to deeper currents that science has not yet learned to see. Both fears are real. Both safeguards are needed. Yet between them lies the mystery, and in that mystery we are compelled to dwell. Perhaps the deepest irony is that science itself often begins where myth once stood. Lightning was once the anger of gods, now understood as electricity. The stars were once the lanterns of deities, now nuclear furnaces scattered across galaxies. But the mystery has not vanished, it has simply shifted. For even as science explains, it uncovers deeper questions. If the multiverse exists, what lies beyond it? If consciousness arises from quantum processes, what does that say about the nature of mind and reality? Each answer expands the horizon. Each horizon feels strangely familiar, as though we are walking paths already traced in the symbolic maps of myth. Could it be, then, that what science calls discovery is, in some sense, remembrance? This possibility blurs the line between coincidence and cosmic memory. The skeptic points to chance. Given enough myths, some will resemble modern theories. The believer points to recurrence. Given that so many myths echo cosmic structures, they must be drawing on something real. The tension will never resolve neatly because both views hold power. Yet it is in this unresolved space that wonder thrives. For the human spirit does not live by certainty alone. It is nourished by questions that stretch beyond the measurable, by mysteries that beckon us to keep searching even in silence. And so the debate continues, circling like planets around a hidden star. Coincidence? Cosmic memory? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. But what cannot be denied is the effect this tension has on us. It forces us to confront not only the limits of our knowledge, but the possibility that knowledge itself may take forms we have not yet learned to recognize. The archaeologist demands bones and stones. The physicist demands data. The seeker listens to the story and feels resonance. Each holds a fragment, and perhaps it is only together that the fragments can form a whole. If myths are coincidence, then they are extraordinary coincidences, threads woven through time and culture that hint at universal patterns of human thought. If they are memories, then they are even more extraordinary evidence that our ancestors touched truths we have forgotten, truths waiting to be rediscovered. Either way, the debate reveals something profound. Humanity has always reached beyond itself, crafting meaning in the face of the infinite. Whether through stone circles, sacred texts, or scientific equations, we have always been searching for the same thing, the place where the human story meets the cosmic story. And as we stand in this unresolved tension, another question arises. If memory and myth may carry echoes of cosmic truth, what role does consciousness itself play in preserving or perceiving it? Could the mind be the bridge between coincidence and reality, the vessel that remembers what history forgets? Perhaps the greatest paradox of human history lies not in what we know, but in how differently we have chosen to tell the same story. Myths and science appear, at first glance, to exist on opposite ends of the spectrum, one cloaked in metaphor, ritual, and symbol, the other grounded in equations, logic, and experimental verification. Yet, if we look closely, their narratives sometimes shimmer with an uncanny resonance, as though the same cosmic truth is being whispered through different languages. Could it be that myth was not ignorance, but translation? That ancient civilizations, lacking particle accelerators or supercomputers, still managed to brush against the very edges of the multiverse and encode their glimpses in the only medium they had: story. Take the many worlds myths that echo across cultures. The Norse spoke of Yggdrasil, the world tree, with branches stretching across 9 realms of existence. Hindu cosmology envisioned vast cycles of creation and dissolution, with multiple universes bubbling like foam upon an infinite cosmic ocean. The Mayan Popol Vuh described layered realities, overlapping worlds where gods, humans, and spirits crossed boundaries. These are not descriptions of stars and galaxies in the modern sense, but they carry the same haunting intuition. The reality is not singular, that it splinters, layers, and recycles itself beyond ordinary perception. Compare this to Max Tegmark's hierarchy of multiverse levels, where he proposes everything from infinite cosmic bubbles to mathematical structures as real, self-contained universes. The metaphors differ, but the essence feels startlingly aligned. Reality is plural, not singular. Skeptics might insist that such comparisons are coincidence. After all, human imagination is boundless, and to dream of layered worlds is simply to dream of the unknown. Yet the consistency of these motifs, found on opposite sides of the globe and in civilizations that never contacted each other, begs a deeper question. Were these myths merely fantasies, or were they intuitive translations of truths embedded in consciousness itself? Perhaps what Tegmark expresses in mathematical equations, ancient shamans access through ritual, meditation, and altered states. One through reason, the other through intuition, different methods, yet converging visions. Consider the role of mathematics itself, often hailed as the ultimate tool of modern science. To many physicists, numbers are the purest reflection of universal order. But in the ancient world, numbers were more than tools. They were symbols of sacred harmony. Pythagoras taught that the cosmos itself was music, a symphony of ratios and vibrations. The Mayans built calendars with astonishing astronomical precision, blending cycles of Venus and the sun into ritual life. Vedic seers encoded mathematical symmetries in chants, seeing rhythm as a key to the structure of reality. Modern physics might use tensor equations or quantum probability functions, but at its root lies the same conviction that mathematics is not just invented, but discovered, that it reveals something deeper than human thought, something woven into the very fabric of existence. Could it be that when ancient civilizations spoke in numbers and symbols, they were not speculating idly, but tapping into the same structures we now approach with particle physics? This possibility reframes the relationship between myth and science. Myth may not have been primitive science, nor science myth refined, but rather two incomplete fragments of the same mosaic. Each offers glimpses of truth, filtered through the lenses available at the time. Ancient civilizations lacked instruments, but possessed methods of consciousness exploration that remain undervalued in the modern age. Science, on the other hand, wields extraordinary tools, but often dismisses the symbolic richness of human intuition. Neither is complete in itself. Yet together, they suggest a puzzle that may one day resolve into a grander synthesis, where equations and myths no longer appear as rivals, but as collaborators. This synthesis also challenges our assumptions about what constitutes knowledge. Modernity insists that knowledge must be measurable, testable, and reproducible. Myth, by contrast, thrives in ambiguity, using metaphor to hint at truths that cannot be measured directly. But does that make one truer than the other? If a shaman in the Amazon describes traveling between worlds during an ayahuasca ritual, science may dismiss this as a hallucination. Yet what if consciousness, at quantum levels, is capable of perceiving structures our instruments cannot yet detect? If an ancient text describes gods who descend from the heavens and create cycles of time, should we read this literally, or as a symbolic way of pointing toward cosmic patterns we are only now beginning to study through cosmology? Perhaps myth was never meant to provide literal blueprints, but to preserve awe, orientation, and an intuitive grasp of truths that could not otherwise be held. The deeper we look, the more science itself begins to resemble myth. String theory speaks of hidden dimensions curled up beyond perception, membranes colliding to birth universes, and invisible symmetries dictating the behavior of matter. To a layperson, these ideas sound as fantastic as any ancient legend. Yet scientists pursue them with the same devotion the priests once reserved for the sacred. And just as myths inspired temples and rituals, modern theories inspire particle colliders, satellites, and massive detectors buried deep underground. The methods differ, but the drive is the same: to glimpse what lies beyond the veil of the visible. The possibility that both science and myth are incomplete fragments of one larger story is not merely romantic. It reshapes how we think about progress. Instead of viewing history as a linear march from ignorance to enlightenment, we might see it as a spiral, circling the same truths in different forms. Ancient civilizations encoded them in metaphor. We encode them in mathematics. Both risk distortion, both invite misinterpretation, but both may ultimately circle toward the same center. And perhaps this is why the resonance between myths and multiverse theories feels so powerful. It is not that myths were scientific treatises, nor that physics is mythology disguised. Rather, both emerge from the same human drive to bridge the finite mind with the infinite cosmos. Both are attempts to map what exceeds comprehension, to translate the untranslatable. If myths seem eerily aligned with modern theories, it may be because the truths they gesture toward are timeless, like a mountain seen from different valleys, described in different languages, but always the same mountain. The synthesis invites humility. It reminds us that science does not own truth, nor does myth. Each reveals a dimension, but neither reveals the whole. And so we find ourselves standing at a threshold, inheritors of two traditions: the cold precision of mathematics and the warm ambiguity of myth. Alone, each is incomplete. Together, they may whisper of a cosmos more vast, more mysterious, and more alive than either tradition dares to admit. And if this is so, then perhaps the stories we tell today, the equations we draft, the simulations we run, the myths we revisit are not the end of knowledge, but echoes of a much older dialogue between human beings and the universe itself. A dialogue that continues, shifting languages, but never losing its central theme. The reality is larger than us, yet within us. Infinite, yet intimate. Unknowable, yet always calling to be known. If myths and science are indeed fragments of the same larger story, then the question becomes, what kind of story are we participating in? Ancient traditions often emphasize that humans were not passive observers of the cosmos, but active participants. Rituals, chants, and meditations were not just spiritual exercises. They were methods of alignment, attempts to synchronize human consciousness with the rhythms of the universe. Modern physics, too, edges toward this participatory view. John Wheeler's Participatory Universe suggests that observation itself plays a role in shaping reality, that the act of measurement collapses probabilities into existence. What shamans and mystics once enacted in symbolic form humans, weaving themselves into the fabric of reality physics, now hints at through quantum paradoxes. But what if these parallels are not just coincidences? What if myth and science are complementary ways of perceiving the same participatory truth? Perhaps the ancients, in their ceremonies, stumbled into states of consciousness where they glimpsed the malleability of reality, intuiting what we now describe as the observer effect. They could not write equations, but they could encode their insights in myths of gods who shape worlds, of songs that sustain creation, of cosmic dances that bind heaven and earth. These stories may have been less about literal deities and more about the recognition that reality itself responds to participation. Critics might argue that this is an overreach, that drawing parallels between myth and science risks romanticizing both. Yet even within the sciences, metaphors are unavoidable. Physicists describe particles as waves, dimensions as strings, forces as fields. These are not literal truths, but metaphors stretched toward the ineffable. In this sense, science itself is myth-making with numbers. It builds narratives to render the invisible visible. Myths, in turn, were attempts to give form to realities too immense or subtle for direct description. Both are translations, one into the symbolic, the other into the mathematical. Both succeed in part, and both fail in part. This shared incompleteness may be the point. If we imagine science and myth as two eyes, each with its own blind spots, then only by using both might we achieve depth perception. Through science, we see the measurable. Through myth, we sense the immeasurable. Together, they hint at a stereoscopic vision of reality, one that reveals depth where before there was only surface. And perhaps this is why human history seems to circle back, again and again, to similar questions. Where do we come from? What is consciousness? What lies beyond death? What is the nature of the universe? Each era answers differently, but the questions remain constant, as though they are etched into the very structure of our being. The convergence of myth and science also suggests that knowledge is not linear but recursive. We do not leave myth behind as we advance. Instead, we reinterpret it in the light of new discoveries. Consider how Jung saw myths as archetypal maps of the psyche, or how Joseph Campbell viewed them as guiding frameworks for human experience. Now, in the age of quantum physics and cosmology, myths can be revisited as metaphorical translations of truths about the multiverse, time, and consciousness. A Norse tale of 9 worlds may not be a literal cosmology, but as metaphor, it gestures toward the plurality of realities that modern physics now entertains. A Hindu cycle of universes may not be a scientific model, but it resonates with theories of eternal inflation, where universes endlessly arise and dissolve. Perhaps the deeper lesson is that the cosmos has always been speaking to us, but in different dialects. In the past, it spoke through symbols, visions, and myths. Today, it speaks through mathematics, telescopes, and experiments. Both are languages of awe. Both are attempts by finite beings to engage the infinite. And perhaps what we call progress is not the replacement of one language with another, but the gradual recognition that all languages are partial, and that the truth transcends them all. If we accept this possibility, then the walls we have built between science and myth may be less about reality and more about human pride. Science prides itself on rigor, myth on meaning. Yet without rigor, meaning drifts into fantasy. Without meaning, rigor drifts into sterility. The cosmos, it seems, demands both. The precision of the equation and the poetry of the story. Neither alone can capture it, but together they gesture towards something larger, something that may be the true legacy of both ancient and modern civilizations. In this light, the myths of the past cease to be relics of ignorance and instead become companions in our ongoing exploration. They are not outdated errors, but parallel attempts to touch the same mystery that scientists now chase in laboratories and observatories. And perhaps future generations will look back on our equations the same way we look at myths, not as final answers, but as beautiful, necessary translations of truths too vast to be fully captured. And so, standing at this threshold, we are invited to a radical humility. The story of the cosmos is larger than science, larger than myth, larger than any single perspective. To honor it fully, we may need to weave together the rigor of modern physics with the imagination of ancient stories, allowing each to correct and enrich the other. In doing so, we might discover that what seemed like two different traditions were never opposed at all. They were always parts of the same human dialogue, with the infinite always fragments of a larger, unfinished story still unfolding through us. If myths and science are indeed fragments of one unfinished story, then the natural question becomes, what awaits us in the chapters yet to be written? For thousands of years, humans gazed at the night sky and wove it into narrative tapestries, tales of hunters, tricksters, gods, and worlds beyond our own. Today, we peer into that same sky with radio telescopes, particle detectors, and supercomputers. Yet the questions remain hauntingly familiar. Could it be that the myths of yesterday were not primitive fictions, but early attempts to grapple with the very same mysteries physics now struggles to quantify? The ancients spoke of thresholds between worlds, doors guarded by gods, rivers that divided realms of the living and the dead, ladders of light reaching to higher planes. Physics, in its own language, speaks of quantum tunneling, wormholes, and dimensional membranes. These descriptions may seem worlds apart, but perhaps they are different translations of the same intuition. That reality is not a closed box, but a layered, permeable fabric. The question is not whether myth or science is right, but whether together they whisper toward a truth larger than either could hold alone. Skeptics might object, insisting that to draw these parallels is to blur lines between metaphor and measurement. Yet history shows that intuition often precedes discovery. The dream of Kekule gave chemistry the structure of benzene. Einstein's thought experiments birthed relativity. The line between imagination and insight is thin, and myths may well be humanity's oldest laboratory for thought experiments about the cosmos. They do not predict equations, but they prepare the mind to receive them, planting seeds that bloom centuries later in the form of science. If this is true, then myths are not dead relics, but living archives of intuition, holding patterns that may yet inspire future breakthroughs. And perhaps our current scientific models, so precise, so confident, are themselves myths in the making, destined to be seen by future civilizations as symbolic, partial, and beautiful, but incomplete. For what is the multiverse if not a modern myth? A narrative scaffold we erect to stretch our minds toward the inconceivable. The possibility that myth and science are entwined invites us to view humanity itself differently. We are not merely creatures of survival, clawing through the ages for food and shelter. We are creatures of story, of imagination, of awe. Our survival has always depended not just on tools, but on meaning, on our ability to weave patterns from chaos, to glimpse order in mystery, to dream of worlds beyond the horizon. In this sense, myths of the past and equations of the present are not rivals, but siblings, both born of the same longing. The longing to belong to the cosmos by understanding it thought. And so the question emerges, could it be that what science calls discovery and what myth calls revelation are, in essence, the same act? The human spirit reaching across the void, grasping for fragments of the infinite? If so, then perhaps the multiverse is not just a scientific hypothesis or a mythological metaphor, but a mirror reflecting our own nature. For just as the multiverse suggests infinite variations of reality, so too do myths and sciences reflect infinite variations of human imagination. The truth is not in choosing one over the other, but in recognizing that both are attempts to translate the same cosmic silence into human words. The deeper we look, the more we find that these translations overlap. The Mayan cycles of creation and destruction echo inflationary models of expanding and collapsing universes. The Vedic hymns that speak of reality woven from sound resonate with string theory's vibrating filaments. The Norse vision of Yggdrasil, the world tree linking realms, mirrors the physicist's search for a unifying framework binding dimensions together. Coincidence or memory? Perhaps these are echoes of something larger, a pattern that human consciousness keeps rediscovering in different languages and different eras. To stand at this intersection is to feel both the humility of our limits and the grandeur of our reach. For all our progress, the cosmos remains a mystery. For all their beauty, myths remain incomplete. But in the tension between the two, something astonishing happens. A glimpse of unity, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, the universe has always been telling us one story, and we have been listening through many voices. And so, as we prepare to move forward, the stage is set for the next question, the most pressing, the most haunting. If myth and science are not enemies but companions, then what happens when we let them speak together? Could the great divide between evidence and imagination collapse, revealing not two stories, but one? Beneath the surface of our sciences and our myths lies a shared hunger, the drive to stitch together fragments into a whole. Human history has always been a tapestry of incomplete patterns, each generation inheriting shards of knowledge, symbols, and questions, then weaving them into its own interpretation. When we study the myths of forgotten civilizations or the equations of cutting-edge physics, we are not encountering final truths. We are sifting through fragments of the infinite, each piece glimmering with possibility, but never fully revealing the totality. The challenge is not to choose between them, but to learn how to read them side by side, as parts of one vast, unfinished manuscript written by the cosmos itself. Consider the way myths preserve truths not in numbers, but in patterns. The myth of eternal return, present in Hindu cycles, Mayan calendars, and even Greek thought, reflects an intuition that time is not linear but cyclical. Today, physicists wonder if the universe undergoes endless expansions and contractions, a cosmic bounce instead of a one-time Big Bang. Neither side proves the other, yet the resonance between them suggests a shared intuition. The reality may not be a straight arrow, but a circle or even an infinite spiral. Myths preserve intuition. Physics tries to test it. Together, they hint at something larger than either discipline could grasp alone. And then there is mathematics itself, often called the purest language of science. To Max Tegmark, the universe is not just described by mathematics, it is mathematics. Every equation, every symmetry, every logical structure is not just a tool, but the essence of reality. Strikingly, myths, too, are mathematical in their own way. The precise alignments of temples with solstices, the numerical codes hidden in sacred texts, the ritual repetition of certain numbers, all suggest that ancient civilizations understood numbers not merely as quantity, but as quality, a sacred key to the structure of existence. In this sense, both modern science and ancient myth treat mathematics as a bridge between the human mind and the cosmos. The one does so with equations, the other with symbolism. What if these fragments, mythic symbols, and mathematical equations are reflections of the same underlying order? Imagine holding a crystal up to the light. From one angle, you see a rainbow of colors. From another, you see pure transparency. Science and myth may be two such angles, each refracting the same hidden geometry of the cosmos. The tragedy is that we often set them against one another, demanding that one be right and the other wrong. But the cosmos itself may not care about our categories. It may only whisper its truths in multiple voices, leaving us to realize that the harmony lies not in reduction but in synthesis. Yet, how do we pursue such synthesis without falling into the trap of romanticizing myths or overextending scientific models? The answer lies in humility. Science provides us with the rigor of testing, the discipline of doubt, the humility of being wrong. Myth provides us with the richness of meaning, the acknowledgement of mystery, the humility of not knowing. Both teach us to step back and admit that we are grasping at fragments. To combine them is not to blur the lines, but to accept that truth itself may be polyphonic, speaking in more than one register at once. Think of the great puzzles that haunt both physics and philosophy. What is consciousness? What was before the Big Bang? Why is there something rather than nothing? Science approaches these questions with experiments and models, but it often runs into paradoxes that resemble myth in their strangeness. Myth, on the other hand, approaches them with narrative and symbolism, but it often gestures toward realities that feel strangely scientific when translated into modern language. Could it be that these questions are unanswerable by either discipline alone because they demand a dialogue between them? Perhaps the true map of reality requires myth to reveal its contours and science to measure its dimensions. The danger, of course, is misinterpretation. Pseudoscience thrives when myth is treated as literal physics or when speculation is disguised as evidence. But the opposite danger is also real, that in dismissing myths as fantasy, we may throw away intuitions that could have seeded discoveries. The challenge, then, is discernment, knowing how to read myths not as blueprints for particle accelerators, but as symbolic whispers of truths that science may one day articulate. To ignore them is to risk blindness. To worship them is to risk delusion. But to hold them in tension is to open the possibility of new insight. This tension reflects our own dual nature. We are not only rational beings, but also imaginative ones, not only seekers of data, but also makers of meaning. Perhaps the multiverse, if it exists, is mirrored within us not just in the external branching of realities, but in the internal branching of human consciousness, which explores through both reason and story. To embrace both is not weakness but wholeness, an acknowledgement that the human quest for truth requires every tool available. If we step back, the synthesis of myth and science looks less like an academic exercise and more like an evolutionary necessity. Civilizations that lose touch with meaning collapse into nihilism. Civilizations that lose touch with rigor collapse into superstition. Survival, at the deepest level, may depend on our ability to integrate both, to build technologies guided by meaning, and to tell stories informed by truth. In this sense, the fragments of the infinite are not just intellectual puzzles. They are the seeds of our future, determining whether we flourish or fall, and so we arrive at a profound possibility. That science and myth are not competing accounts of reality, but complementary languages of the human encounter with the infinite. Myths give us orientation. Science gives us navigation. Myths remind us why the journey matters. Science shows us how far we've come. To privilege one over the other is to walk with one eye closed. To embrace both is to glimpse depth, dimension, and mystery in ways neither could offer alone. What happens if we begin to live this way, reading myths not as lies but as metaphors, reading science not as final but as evolving, and weaving them together into a shared story of humanity? Perhaps we would no longer see ourselves as lost children in an indifferent universe, nor as masters of a mechanical world, but as co-authors of a cosmic narrative still unfolding. In this narrative, every discovery is a verse, every myth a metaphor, every question a signpost. And though we may never hold the whole, we would at least know that we are part of something vast, beautiful, and unfinished. From this vantage, the question is no longer whether myths anticipated science or whether science validates myths. The question becomes, what kind of story will we tell next? Will we continue to pit reason against imagination? Or will we recognize that both are fragments of the same infinite whole, waiting to be woven into a synthesis worthy of the cosmos itself? Because if there is one truth that emerges from this convergence, it is this: reality itself is more mysterious than any model, more profound than any story, and more infinite than any imagination. Myths hint at it. Science measures it. But only together do they begin to sing the unfinished song of the cosmos, a song that calls us, still, to listen. From the beginning, this journey has not been about answers, but about echoes. Echoes in stone, in myth, in mathematics, in the silence between stars. We set out to ask whether lost civilizations could have touched truths we now struggle to frame with quantum equations and cosmological theories. Yet as we arrive at the edge of this exploration, we find that the real mystery is not what they knew, but what we are still learning to remember. For the cosmos is not a book that can be closed with certainty. It is a mirror, vast and shifting, reflecting not only galaxies and multiverses, but the very mind that dares to look. Think of the ruins at Göbekli Tepe, of temples aligned with stars, of myths that whisper of layered worlds. To the archaeologist, these are artifacts of survival, calendars, and rituals. To the dreamer, they are fragments of a cosmic code. To the physicist, they may hold no relevance at all. And yet, when seen together, they form a mosaic, each piece incomplete, each perspective partial, but together suggesting that humans have always reached beyond what was visible, always intuited that reality is larger than the material surface. The ruins are not proof of multiverse knowledge, but they remind us that the hunger for infinity has always lived within us. The same is true of science itself. Equations carve pathways into the invisible, but every solution opens new paradoxes. The multiverse remains unproven, perhaps unprovable, and yet it captivates. Why? Because it resonates with something ancient, something that myths once sang and rituals once enacted. The intuition that reality is not one but many, not flat but layered, not closed but endlessly open. It is this resonance, more than evidence, that fuels our fascination. The cosmos teases us with glimpses, but never withholds the mystery. And so we arrive at a paradox as old as philosophy. The closer we come to explaining reality, the more mysterious it becomes. The equations that describe subatomic particles dissolve into uncertainty. The models of cosmic inflation stretch toward infinities we cannot test. The search for consciousness reveals not a machine but a mystery, as if the observer is woven into the observed. Science, at its edge, begins to resemble myth. It tells stories of invisible realms, of unseen dimensions, of realities beyond grasp. The difference is not that one is true and the other false, but that both are mirrors, showing us the limits of our perception. The forgotten mirror of reality, then, is not hidden in ruins or buried in ancient texts. It is here, in the human mind, in our capacity to imagine and to measure, to doubt and to believe. We are the mirror, reflecting the cosmos even as it reflects us. And perhaps that is the secret, that the universe has always been self-aware, not through gods on high, but through the eyes and thoughts of the beings who gaze upon it. Wheeler's participatory universe suggests that observation is creation, that reality is not complete without consciousness. If so, then myth and science were never separate. They were always humanity's way of remembering itself as part of the cosmic story. But how should we leave this journey? With certainty? Impossible. With doubt? That would be too small. The only way to close is to remain open, to stand in the tension between evidence and myth, between what is known and what is dreamed, and to feel the awe that bridges them. For awe is the thread that binds every fragment together. It is the spark that drove shamans to paint the cosmos on cave walls, that drove philosophers to map heavens into words, that drives physicists today to push colliders and telescopes to their limits. Awe is the true inheritance of humanity, and it is the closest we may ever come to truth. So perhaps the question was never, did lost civilizations know the multiverse? But why do we, across time, keep searching for it? The answer is that the multiverse is not only out there, in equations or in myths. It is within us, mirrored in our endless capacity to imagine, to question, to wonder. Each possibility, each world, each story, is a reflection of what it means to be human in an infinite cosmos. And as we close this chapter, the final image is not of ruins or equations, but of a mere one that reflects both the stars above and the mind within. For the forgotten mirror of reality is not something to be found. It is something to be remembered. And in remembering, we do not end the story. We continue it. From the beginning of this journey, we have wandered through ruins and equations, through myths of many worlds and theories of multiverses. We asked whether ancient civilizations could have touched truths we now chase with particle colliders and mathematical models. But as we stand at the threshold of this conclusion, we realize something profound. The answer was never meant to be final. The cosmos has always spoken in whispers, in fragments, in reflections. To demand a final word is to misunderstand its language. The universe answers not with certainty, but with mirrors that show us ourselves. Consider again the stones of Göbekli Tepe, standing in silence, aligned with the stars. To the archaeologist, they are markers of ritual. To the physicist, they are irrelevant. To the dreamer, they are fragments of a cosmic code. Each interpretation holds a sliver of truth, yet none captures the whole. That is the paradox of knowledge. Every lens illuminates while also obscuring. Science dissects myth dreams. Philosophy questions each necessary, none complete. It is only when their fragments overlap that a larger image begins to shimmer, fleetingly, like a constellation glimpsed between passing clouds. The forgotten mirror of reality is not an artifact buried beneath the earth. It is the way these fragments myth, science, story, number reflect one another. A myth of layered worlds resonates with Tegmark's mathematical levels of multiverse. A ritual dance echoes quantum entanglements, invisible connections. An ancient map of heavens mirrors the equations of general relativity. Are these coincidences? Or are they reminders that human beings, across time, have always intuited the same truth? That reality is not flat, not singular, not closed, but layered, many, open? Here lies the heart of the matter. Myths are not failed science. Science is not myth disguised. They are both languages, different dialects of the same longing. Myths speak in metaphor. Science speaks in mathematics. One sings, the other measures. But what they sing and measure is the same mystery. The ungraspable, infinite nature of reality. And what of us? We stand between them, translators of the infinite. The physicist who maps the quantum foam, the priest who chants of hidden realms, the poet who dreams of other worlds, all are doing the same work. They are holding a mirror to the cosmos, asking it to show itself, and finding that the reflection is also their own face. Wheeler once said, "We are participators in bringing into being not only the near and here, but the far away and long ago. If observation shapes reality, then myth was not wrong to imagine that ritual opens doorways, that story sustains creation. Science reframes it. Observation collapses probabilities. Myth embodied it. Ritual sustains worlds. Both point to the same participatory truth. The cosmos is incomplete without consciousness. But what does this mean for us? Now, at this edge of knowledge, it means that the mirror we seek in ruins or in equations has always been within us. The forgotten mirror of reality is not an object, but an act. The act of looking, of asking, of wondering. Every time we imagine another world, every time we question what lies beyond, we are remembering that mirror. We are continuing the oldest human inheritance, awe. Awe is the one constant across time. It is awe that led shamans to paint galaxies on cave walls. Awe that led temple builders to align stones with solstices. Awe that led Einstein to call relativity the most beautiful theory. Awe is not a decoration, it is the thread that ties every human attempt at truth together. Without awe, science collapses into data without meaning. Without awe, myth becomes superstition without depth. Awe is the key that allows fragments to resonate into something larger. And here is the irony. The more science advances, the closer it comes to myth. Quantum theory speaks of superpositions and entanglements that sound like stories of invisible threads. Cosmology speaks of universes without end, echoing myths of infinite worlds. Neuroscience struggles with consciousness, a puzzle myths have always treated as sacred. At the frontier of knowledge, science bends back toward story, and story bends toward science. They meet in the mirror, where both reveal that truth is not one-dimensional but layered, shimmering, alive dot. So perhaps the question was never, did lost civilizations know the multiverse? That question seeks evidence where none may exist. The deeper question is, why do humans across time keep imagining the multiverse? Why do we dream of many worlds, of parallel selves, of infinite skies? The answer may be that the multiverse is not only out there, waiting for telescopes to detect. It is also within us, encoded in imagination itself. Each myth, each equation, each dream is a reflection of that inner infinity. Imagine this final scene. The camera pulls back from an ancient stone circle, from equations chalked on a blackboard, from the glint of a telescope pointed skyward. It pulls further back. Continents, oceans, clouds, the earth suspended in blackness. Further still, the Milky Way spiraling in silence, then galaxies clustering, then superclusters stretching like webs. And finally, further until the screen is filled with endless universes, each a bubble in a sea of possibility. And in the center of it all, invisible, yet undeniable, a mirror. Not a mirror of glass, but of consciousness. A mirror in which the cosmos sees itself through us. The forgotten mirror of reality is not something to be dug up, not something to be proved or disproved. It is something to be remembered. Remembered in awe and myth and science in silence. Remembered in the act of asking questions that have no answers. In the humility of knowing that the universe will always be larger than we can measure. Remembered every time we look up at the night sky and feel that shiver of wonder dot. And so we close, not with an answer, but with a return to the beginning. A question. What if the ancients were not wrong, and we are not yet right? What if myth and science are two halves of the same unfinished story? What if the universe has always been whispering to us through ruins and equations, waiting for us to listen with both mind and heart? A forgotten mirror waits not in the past, not in the future, but here, in this very act of wonder, in you,